These are 20 hidden facts about the searchers that reveal the chaos, brilliance, and cultural transformation behind John Ford's masterpiece. 0 Academy Award nominations greeted the film when it premiered in 1956, yet decades later it climbed to become what the American Film Institute ranks as the greatest Western ever made. What you're about to discover goes deeper than the familiar stories, from unplugged cameras and scorpion bites to deleted musical scores and a decades-long preservation battle that almost erased the film forever. The German-born actor who played Chief Scar got nicknamed the KRAUT Comanche by Navajo extras. An accordion player manipulated actors' emotions during dialogue scenes. The cinematographer held a physics degree and filmed classified material at Los Alamos without ever shooting a single frame of black and white film in his entire career. A conceptual artist stretched the entire 2-hour film across 5 years of real time in the Mojave Desert. Let's get started. Fact number 1. Ward Bond unplugged the camera to shave during the film's most powerful scene. John Wayne delivered a monologue about discovering and burying Lucy's body during one of the most emotionally devastating scenes in The Searchers, nailing the performance on the first take and pouring everything he had into that moment. The camera stopped. Ford erupted while Winton Hoch examined the massive VISTAVISION camera and reported that it had inexplicably cut out, leaving nobody able to explain what happened. Reshooting the entire sequence became necessary, which meant Wayne had to summon that emotional intensity all over again, while Ford fumed about the technical failure. Ward Bond had unplugged the camera so he could plug in his electric razor, then proceeded to shave on set while Wayne delivered the performance of his life. Immediate knowledge of what Bond had done stayed concealed by the crew from Ford for years, keeping that secret all the way until after Ward Bond's death in 1960, when Winton Hoch finally told Ford the truth at a Hollywood party and witnesses said Ford's face turned white. Olive Carey recounted the story in Scott Alan Nolan's biography 3 Bad Men, describing how Bond unplugged the camera during the high point of the scene, plugged in the razor, and proceeded to shave while Ford became uncharacteristically speechless when he learned the truth years later. Decades of working together between Ford and Bond show up in that reaction. Fact number 2. Ford was bitten by a scorpion, and John Wayne delivered the perfect quip. Heat over 100 degrees, water trucked in from 90 miles away, and scorpions living in the rocks and sand made Monument Valley in summer 1955 a place that could kill you in multiple ways. A scorpion bit Ford during location filming, sending producer C.V. Whitney into a panic about losing his legendary director to a venomous creature in the middle of the desert. $3,750,000 had gone into Whitney's investment for his company's first film, and now he asked everyone within earshot what they were going to do if they lost Ford. Wayne visited Ford's trailer to check on him, then emerged with what became one of the great quips in Hollywood history when he announced that John was fine and it was the scorpion that died. Scott Iman's biography Print the Legend preserves the story, capturing the mythology that surrounded John Ford along with the genuine danger of the production. Spectacular vistas that no studio backlot could replicate came from Monument Valley, but filming there meant accepting risk when medical help sat hours away, and something going seriously wrong could mean death. Fact number 3. Danny BORZAGE played live accordion during dialogue to manipulate emotions. Danny BORZAGE, brother of director Frank BORZAGE, played accordion live on set during dialogue scenes and emotionally intense moments under Ford's direction, not between takes but during the actual filming. Catherine Kalinak's book, How the West Was Sung, includes Harry Carey Jr.'s description of how Ford let BORZAGE play straight through dialogue and important moments in the picture, with all kinds of music that he thought was emotionally correct for the moment, which profoundly affected the actors. Training and imagination normally create emotional reality for actors, but Ford added another layer by giving them live music as an emotional guide that steered their performances through melody and rhythm. Wayne credited the soft music on the set with helping him achieve the emotional tone for the film's most difficult scenes, unusual for an actor not known for discussing acting technique. And BORZAGE appears on camera in the film playing the Yellow Rose of Texas during the homecoming celebration. Audiences who saw The Searchers in 1956 actually watched the same man who had been manipulating the actors' emotions through live music throughout the production. Emotional environments got created by Ford rather than relying on verbal instruction, using music and landscape and the harsh conditions of Monument Valley along with his own notorious cruelty to shape what appeared on screen. And if you're discovering these behind-the-scenes secrets for the first time and realizing just how much hidden history lives inside this classic Western, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting started and the facts only get more surprising from here. Fact number 4. Henry Brandon was nicknamed the KRAUT Comanche by Navajo extras. Berlin-born Heinrich Kleinbach, came to Hollywood as Henry Brandon and built a career playing exotic characters and villains before Ford cast him as Chief Scar in The Searchers, with his Shakespearean training and classical acting technique. Navajo extras working on the film nicknamed him the KRAUT Comanche. Waiting until the first day of shooting, Brandon asked Ford why he'd been cast as a Comanche chief when his blue eyes had cost him other Native American roles in the past, since producers typically wanted brown eyes for authenticity. Ford's answer became a line that Brandon quoted for the rest of his career when he told him that the exception, dramatically speaking, is always more exciting than the rule. Future auditions saw Brandon telling directors about Ford's principle of the dramatic exception, and he always got the parts by quoting Mr. Ford, but his overall experience with Ford proved less pleasant when he described their relationship as combative. Ford deliberately goaded the Shakespearean-trained actor by insisting over lunch that Shakespeare didn't write his own plays. Fact number 5. Ken Curtis's improvised accent launched his career as Festus on Gunsmoke. Charlie McCory was a small role in The Searchers given to Ken Curtis, who was Ford's son-in-law married to the director's daughter Barbara, playing one of the young men competing for Laurie Jorgensen's affections without much substance to the part. Curtis told a story during a filming break, using an exaggerated version of his rural eastern Colorado accent, which Harry Carey Jr. described as Colorado dryland, that distinctive sound of the high plains wheat country, and that's when Ford overheard it. Ford told Curtis to use that exact accent for Charlie McCory, but Curtis objected because he didn't think the accent fit the character or helped the performance. A different calculation was in Ford's mind when he argued that the accent would get Curtis noticed in what was otherwise the thankless role of the guy who doesn't win the girl, and Ford turned out to be prophetic. Hollywood embraced that accent as Curtis's calling card, landing him the role of Festus Hagen on Gunsmoke 8 years later in 1964. One episode featured the character originally, but it proved so popular that Curtis became a series regular, playing Festus for 11 years across over 300 episodes and becoming one of the most beloved characters in television Western history. Fact number 6. Ford was unusually kind to Patrick Wayne, which made him unpopular. Lieutenant Greenhill was Patrick Wayne's role in The Searchers, as John Wayne's son, working with one of Hollywood's most notoriously difficult directors while young and relatively inexperienced. Ford never abused Patrick Wayne and was actually crazy about him, which created problems. Scott Iman's Print the Legend preserves Patrick Wayne's recollection that everyone had their day in the barrel except him, as he was always spared Ford's famous cruelty, making the situation good and bad. Patrick didn't suffer through the humiliation that Ford routinely inflicted on other actors, but it also meant he wasn't exactly the most popular person on the set when everyone else was getting reamed while Patrick walked away untouched. Subtler ways of testing Patrick came from Ford during the scene where Lieutenant Greenhill reports to Reverend Captain Clayton, as Ward Bond and John Wayne deliberately kept interrupting Patrick's dialogue in an unscripted test of the young actor's improvisational nerve and his ability to hold a scene when two legendary performers were actively trying to throw him off. Years later, Patrick admitted that he wasn't acting scared in that scene because he was actually scared, with two giants of American cinema interrupting him while he had to figure out how to respond in character while the camera rolled. Fact number 7. John Wayne named his youngest son after Ethan Edwards. Ethan Edwards was John Wayne's favorite role of his entire career, according to his own assessment, remarkable when you consider the character's moral darkness, as a racist, violent, obsessive man, possibly in love with his brother's wife. A Confederate veteran who never surrendered exists outside civilization and cannot rejoin it, making him a hero who is also a monster, and that's what Wayne chose to honor. 1962 brought Wayne's decision to name his youngest son John Ethan Wayne directly after the character, 6 years after the film's release, demonstrating personal investment that ran deeper than any other role. Ethan Wayne told HistoryNet in 2022 that it's a great legacy and he's proud to carry that moniker. Dozens of Western heroes came through Wayne's performances over 5 decades, but Ethan Edwards represented something different when understanding his own career and screen persona. The character couldn't be redeemed, couldn't settle down, couldn't accept the civilization he fought to protect, which made him unique. Ford offered Wayne the chance to drop The Searchers and star in 7 Men from Now instead, but Wayne turned down that opportunity and stayed committed to Ford's film, while Randolph Scott took the 7 Men from Now role. Choosing The Searchers, choosing to play Ethan Edwards, and never regretting it, shows what the role meant to Wayne. Fact number 8. The VISTAVISION process required the largest production convoy in Ford's history. Massive logistical planning went into getting a film crew to Monument Valley in 1955 when the location sat 90 miles from the nearest paved road, reportedly the farthest point in the continental United States from a railroad line, and everything needed for the production had to be trucked in. Warner Brothers mandated the VISTAVISION format, making this exponentially more complicated. 33 drivers rolled into Monument Valley for the searchers along with 5 5-ton trucks, a 3-ton truck, 2 horse trucks, 1 camera crane truck, a large wardrobe van, 2 medium-sized trucks, a generator truck, a camera car, a sanitary truck, a radio jeep, 3 large tourist buses, 3 station wagons, 3 12-passenger vans, 5 jeeps, a water wagon, a hay truck, and a hot meals wagon, while the camera crew alone comprised 2 35mm cameramen, 2 camera operators, 2 technicians, 3 assistant cameramen, 1 mechanic, 1 16mm cameraman, and 1 stills photographer. True West magazine documented these details from Glenn Frankel's book The Searchers: The Making of an American Legend, revealing the industrial scale of Hollywood production in the 1950s. Generators, gasoline, groceries, water, film stock, costumes, props, camera equipment, and food all had to be trucked in, which meant the production essentially built a temporary city in the desert that existed for the duration of filming and then disappeared. Fact number 9. The film was shot on EASTMANCOLOR negative, not 3-strip Technicolor. Wrong information appears frequently when film historians describe The Searchers as being shot in 3-strip Technicolor, with many sources including the AFI catalog itself making this error. 1956 saw the 3-strip Technicolor camera as essentially obsolete. What actually happened was more complicated and more interesting when the film was shot on EASTMANCOLOR negative, using a standard single-strip color process. Then this negative was used to create 3 black and white color separation masters, which were subsequently printed via the famous Technicolor dye transfer process known as Technicolor number V. Understanding this distinction matters because it explains both the film's extraordinary color quality and the specific preservation challenges that emerged decades later, as 3-strip Technicolor cameras were massive, complex, and expensive to operate. Mid-1950s saw the industry abandoning this system in favor of simpler single-strip color negative films like EASTMANCOLOR. Superior results for decades came from the dye transfer printing process though, and the resulting prints had richer, more saturated colors than prints made through conventional photochemical processes, which is what people respond to when they talk about the incredible color in The Searchers with those Monument Valley sunsets and that brilliant blue sky. Winton Hoch's cinematography combined with the dye transfer printing process to create that effect. Fact number 10. Winton Hoch had a physics degree from Caltech and filmed at Los Alamos. An unusual path to Hollywood came through Winton C. Hoch when he earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in physics from the California Institute of Technology in 1931, then worked as a research physicist after graduating before joining the Technicolor Corporation in 1934 as a lens technician. Physics and optics background at Technicolor made him uniquely qualified to solve the technical challenges of color cinematography while helping develop the 3-color film system that revolutionized cinema in the 1930s. World War II saw Hoch serving in the United States Navy's Photographic Science Laboratory, and part of his wartime service involved filming top-secret material, including work at Los Alamos where scientists developed the atomic bomb before Hollywood welcomed him back after the war as one of the industry's premier color cinematographers. Frank Thompson wrote in the International Dictionary of Films and Filmmakers that in the written history of film thus far, John Ford has tended to get credit for most of Winton C. Hoch's accomplishments. But Hoch's eye for color imparted such rare visual beauty to The Searchers. Never shooting a single frame of black and white film professionally during his entire cinematography career made Hoch one of the few major Hollywood cinematographers who worked exclusively in color. 3 Academy Awards for Best Cinematography came his way for Joan of Arc in 1948, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon in 1949, and The Quiet Man in 1952. Fact number 11. Ford embedded specific color instructions directly in the screenplay. Careful planning on paper sometimes gets obscured by John Ford's reputation as a visual director, but the revised final screenplay for The Searchers preserved at the Lilly Library at Indiana University contains a production note that reveals Ford's precise visual thinking. Scene directions for the sunset sequence before the Comanche attack on the Edwards homestead include this note. Note to W. Hoch. What JF has in mind for this and the following scenes is the same kind of dramatic use of red you achieved in Yellow Ribbon in the scene telling of Custer's defeat. Multiple layers of Ford's working method show up in this single sentence when it demonstrates that Ford embedded technical cinematography notes directly into his screenplays rather than waiting to discuss these ideas on set, because he wanted Hoch thinking about color strategy from the moment he read the script, and that's when Ford used his previous collaborations with Hoch as a reference library. She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, released in 1949, featured a justly famous sunset sequence, and Hoch's cinematography in that scene had won him an Academy Award, which is why Ford wanted that same dramatic use of red for the searchers. A pretty sunset wasn't what Ford asked for, but rather a specific emotional and thematic effect where the use of red would signal danger and impending violence. Fact number 12. Max Steiner was deeply disappointed after Ford deleted multiple score cues. Legendary melodic gift came to John Ford's Western epic when Max Steiner composed the musical score for The Searchers after scoring hundreds of films by 1956, including Gone with the Wind, King Kong, and Casablanca. Over 65 minutes of music across 36 scored cues went into Steiner's composition for The Searchers, building a complex architecture of 7 or more distinct leitmotifs that included the title song as Ethan's theme, the 1856 Civil War ballad Lorena as Martha's forbidden love motif, a youthful strings theme for Martin, a 4-note travel ostinato, a bold fanfare Comanche theme, a pastoral Indian idol for native women, and a menacing 6-note descending construct for Chief Scar. Sophisticated compositional work went into this score, but John Ford retained final control and used that control to carry his own messages into the film by excising several non-diegetic cues that Steiner had composed. Most provocatively, Ford cut a coda of the Comanche theme from the final scene when Steiner had written this coda to provide musical closure to Chief Scar's narrative arc. Insisting the film end on the title song instead became Ford's choice, and scholar Catherine Kalanick documented how Ford retained final control even over the score, while reviewer Craig Lissy described the excision of the coda as a final tweak of Steiner's nose. Deep disappointment came to Steiner from these changes. Fact number 13. The score was preserved on 78 RPM discs with a lost cue. Brigham Young University housed the Max Steiner collection where the original recordings of his score for The Searchers were found, but they had been recorded inexplicably on 78 RPM discs with noticeable groove wear, even though 33 1/3 RPM long-playing records had become the industry standard by 1956. Steiner's score got preserved on the older format for reasons lost to history, and those discs deteriorated over the decades. Later release of the complete score on CD came from the BYU Film Music Archive, remastered by Ray Fiola at Chelsea Rialto Studios when the remastering process had to work around the limitations of the source material, while removing clicks and pops and trying to preserve the original sound quality. One previously unreleased score cue that had been deleted from the picture and overlooked among raw takes during the first CD release appeared in a subsequent remastered edition, meaning that a piece of Steiner's musical vision for The Searchers lay undiscovered for approximately 4 decades. What this shows about film preservation appears when The Searchers became recognized as one of the greatest films ever made, while a piece of its original score remained lost simply because nobody checked all the recording sessions carefully enough. Fragile 78 RPM discs break easily and wear out with repeated playing, making the fact that these particular discs made it from 1956 to the digital age intact enough to be remastered represent good fortune as much as good archival practice. Fact number 14. The 2006 restoration couldn't use the original negative. A major problem faced Warner Brothers when they prepared to release The Searchers on Blu-ray for the film's 50th anniversary in 2006, because the original VISTAVISION camera negative had faded beyond recovery. Notorious instability plagued EASTMANCOLOR negative stock from the 1950s, and the color dyes degraded over time while creating a color shift that could render negatives unusable. Black and white separation masters became the source for the new high-definition transfer when Warner Brothers couldn't use a viable camera negative, and the restoration team had to use these 3 black and white elements to reconstruct the color image through considerable creative interpretation. Unavailable original audio source elements meant the Blu-ray could only present a Dolby Digital 1.0 monotrack from limited materials. Excessive yellow tones that didn't match the original theatrical presentation showed up in the resulting color balance, drawing criticism from viewers, while Ned Price, vice president of mastering at Warner Brothers Technical Operations, discussed these challenges with restoration expert Robert A. Harris at the Digital Bits. 2024 brought advances in scanning technology that allowed the same original negative to be successfully scanned when the 4K Ultra High Definition release used the original negative scanned at 13K resolution and finished in 6.5K, while combining it with yellow separation protection masters. 18 years between restorations demonstrates how preservation technology continues to evolve, and what seemed impossible in 2006 became achievable in 2024. Fact number 15. Alan LeMay sold the rights for $60,000 but refused to write the script. Writing the novel The Searchers gave Alan LeMay understanding of its potential as a film property when C.V. Whitney's newly formed production company approached him about the movie rights, agreeing to sell for $60,000 with one stipulation because he refused to write the screenplay. Prior Hollywood conflicts had left LeMay reportedly burned out, and he didn't want to adapt his own novel, especially not for a renowned martinet like John Ford, which meant $60,000 went into his pocket, and he walked away from the production. C.V. Whitney Pictures became the subject of a bidding war between MGM, Columbia, and Warner Brothers, and that's when Jack Warner won by matching Columbia's offer of a 65-35 profit split, with 65% going to Whitney Productions and 35% to the studio. Sweetening the deal came through Warner charging less overhead than the other studios and pledging to finance up to 1/3 of the production budget. Unlikely film producer status came to Whitney when his full name was Cornelius Vanderbilt Whitney, connecting him to two of America's wealthiest families, and The Searchers represented his company's inaugural production. Fact number 16. Lindsay Anderson wrote the only serious contemporary critique, and it was a positive but not especially insightful reviews greeted The Searchers when it premiered in 1956, with critics recognizing the film as a well-made Western but not seeing anything groundbreaking about it, and that's when Lindsay Anderson was different. Scholars describe his work as apparently the only serious contemporary critique of the film in the autumn 1956 issue of Sight and Sound, and Anderson would later become famous as a director himself. Dismissing the film as a handsome film self-conscious and unconvincing came in Anderson's review of The Searchers, arguing that John Wayne's performance lacked either complexity or consistency, while framing his entire review as a lament about a great filmmaker's decline. This negative assessment was described as prophetic of the line which the English-speaking critical establishment would maintain for nearly 2 decades, and Anderson's pan set the tone for how serious critics approached The Searchers well into the 1970s. A withering review from one of the era's most respected film critics greeted the film that would eventually be ranked as the greatest Western ever made, and that's the irony. What Anderson criticized as self-consciousness in Ford's direction was actually sophisticated formal control, and what he saw as inconsistency in Wayne's performance was actually psychological depth, which shows how difficult it can be to recognize masterpieces when they first appear. Fact number 17. David Lean watched The Searchers repeatedly while preparing Lawrence of Arabia. Preparing to direct Lawrence of Arabia in the late 1950s and early 1960s gave David Lean the challenge of how to film desert landscapes in a way that would serve the narrative rather than just provide pretty backgrounds. The Searchers gave him his answer. Kevin Brownlow, Lean's biographer, documented this obsession when Lean watched Ford's film repeatedly and studied how Ford used Monument Valley not just as a location, but as a dramatic character, and visual similarities between Jordan's Wadi Rum and Monument Valley weren't accidental. Lean was looking for similar qualities with vast spaces, towering rock formations, and an environment that dwarfed human figures. Direct echoes of Ford's compositions appear in several scenes from Lawrence of Arabia, when most notably Sheriff Ali's Across the Desert entrance at the well mirrors Ethan Edwards' arrival across a vast prairie in The Searchers' opening shot. Both cases feature a tiny figure appearing in the distance and slowly approaching the camera over an extended period while building tension through spatial relationships rather than cutting. Understanding what Ford achieved came to Lean because The Searchers used landscape as a psychological projection of its protagonist's interior state, where Ethan Edwards is as vast, unforgiving, and beautiful as Monument Valley, and that's when Lawrence of Arabia applied the same principle to T.E. Lawrence and the Arabian Desert. Fact number 18. Wim Wenders named Searchers as the defining theme of his filmography. Winning the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival for Paris, Texas in 1984 gave Wim Wenders the platform to be explicit about John Ford's influence on his work as the German director. A 2015 NPR interview captured Wenders stating directly that there's a film of John Ford called The Searchers, and sometimes he thinks that's his main topic, describing it as searchers being people who are searching and trying to define what they live for while trying to find the meaning of their lives. One of Europe's most celebrated directors making this statement reveals how Wenders built his career on films about displacement, alienation, and the search for meaning in a fragmented world, while tracing that thematic obsession directly back to John Ford's 1956 Western. Post-war Germany saturated with American culture shaped Wenders growing up, and he described Ford's film as central to his discovery of America through cinema, when he didn't experience America firsthand as a young man but experienced it through movies. Operating essentially as a modern retelling of The Searchers became what Paris, Texas does when a man searches for years for a missing woman, driven by obsession and guilt, then finds her only to discover that reconciliation proves impossible. But Wenders' statement goes beyond Paris, Texas, saying that the archetype of the searcher defines his entire body of work, shows how deeply the searchers influenced him. Fact number 19. Stuart BYRON coined the term supercult movie of the New Hollywood. An unusual reputation had developed around The Searchers by the late 1970s, when it wasn't considered a masterpiece by the general public or by most established film critics, but among a specific generation of filmmakers including Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, John Milius, Paul Schrader, and George Lucas, it had achieved something close to sacred status. First documentation of this phenomenon in mainstream media came from Stuart BYRON when he wrote in New York Magazine on March 5, 1979, and coined the term supercult movie of the New Hollywood for The Searchers, codifying what filmmakers had long known privately about The Searchers becoming the generational touchstone for an entire movement of American cinema, came through BYRON's article, because these directors weren't just influenced by Ford's film but returned to it repeatedly, studied it obsessively, and consciously quoted it in their own work. Sticking came from BYRON's coinage with the phrase supercult movie that captured something existing critical vocabulary couldn't express. Adding The Searchers to their required viewing lists came from film schools, while scholarly articles began appearing in academic journals after the article helped catalyze the academic and critical reassessment that would carry the film from cult object to canonical masterpiece. And that's when BYRON's insight recognized that influence among filmmakers mattered more than critical consensus. Scorsese watching the film annually and Spielberg watching it before every production signaled something about The Searchers' cultural significance. March 5, 1979 matters as a publication date because this came after Star Wars had quoted The Searchers and after Taxi Driver had reimagined it as a contemporary urban nightmare, which meant BYRON was documenting a transformation already well underway. Fact number 20. Douglas Gordon stretched the film to 5 years in the Mojave Desert. One of the most striking pieces of conceptual art based on The Searchers came from Douglas Gordon as the Scottish artist, and his installation 5-Year Drive-By, first shown in 1995 at the Biennale de Lyon, projects every frame of the 119-minute film across 5 years of real time while matching the narrative's time span. Approximately 24 minutes displays each frame in this piece, rendering the image virtually static when movement becomes almost imperceptible, and what was a western lasting less than 2 hours becomes a durational artwork stretching across half a decade. September 2001 saw Gordon install the piece on a freestanding screen in the Mojave Desert near 29 Palms, California, where the setup resembled an abandoned drive-in theater showing an infinitely slow movie to no one, as a ghostly presence in the desert, and that's when Gagosian Gallery in New York exhibited the work from 2017 to 2018. Gordon described 5-Year Drive-By as a companion piece to 24-Hour Psycho, when his 1993 installation stretched Hitchcock's film across an entire day. Additional resonance for this treatment comes from The Searchers, because the film's narrative covers 5 years of obsessive searching, and Gordon's installation makes the viewer experience those 5 years in something approaching real time, when the temporal compression of cinema gets reversed into temporal expansion. Nobody watches the entire installation because that's not the point. As you encounter it, spend time with it, leave and return to find it still playing, while your relationship to the artwork mirrors Ethan Edwards' relationship to his search as ongoing, obsessive, and ultimately futile. The Searchers endures because its contradictions, not despite of them. Like Ethan Edwards himself, the film exists somewhere between civilization and wilderness, between art and chaos, between what was planned and what simply happened when talented people brought cameras and actors and ambition into the desert. If you've enjoyed discovering these hidden stories behind one of cinema's greatest masterworks, hit that like button, drop a comment telling us which fact surprised you most, and subscribe to this channel because we're dedicated to uncovering the untold histories of classic Hollywood films. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into cinema history. Thank you for watching. Until next time.